Welcome back, everyone. This is Zayad Boudiab. I'm a senior application developer and technical trainer. I've been discussing AngularJS and with all its features. Recently, we've been spending a quite amount of time on directives, and obviously that's important to us because directives play a key role with AngularJS. So we need to know how we can work with them. We need to know the different features they provide and how we can handle them. Recently, for example, I discussed with you how I can work with the ng-repeat and also the variables that exist with ng-repeat, like the $odd and the $index. That's a couple examples that we have used. In today's exercise, I'd like to continue my discussion on directives, but specifically I'd like to talk about the ng-repeat start and ng-repeat end and how it can be used in our examples. So let's, that's by the way the first part of the lesson, and then the second part we'll talk about how we can include pieces of HTML within our page. So if our page is big, we can take those like mini views, store them in other HTML files, and be able to include them in our page so we can build a better structured page, especially the reusable components. We can put them in a separate HTML page. So this is the plan for this lesson. Let's go ahead and start with the one with the ng-repeat start and ng-repeat end. As we always do, we need to make sure that our references are in order. So at the top here, underneath the title, I'm going to reference my AngularJS, which is in the scripts folder. The scripts folder exists in the same folder structure as the directives for.html. And also I have the styles folder that contains the Bootstrap min and Bootstrap theme min that I need for this page. For those of you who have not used the min before, this is the minified version, which is smaller size, therefore faster to download. But if you need debug information, you take out the min and you reference the full bootstrap.css and the bootstrap theme.css. Okay, so we set up our references. Then we need to make sure that we are using, we set up our module, and also we set up our controller so we can proceed with our exercise. Again, in the head section here, I'm going to reference or add a script reference for the to include my Angular code that represents the module and the controller. You've seen this before in the previous lessons. For those of you new to this one, we're just creating a module named directive app that does not depend on any other piece of on any other modules or any other pieces of functionality. And then when that module is created, then we do dot controller to create the controller. This is the basic controller. Again, I'm injecting the books array into the scope. That's why we said scope.books. And we need to make sure that up here in our HTML page, we have our ng app defined. That sometimes might just, you forget it and drives you crazy why it's not working. Well, you need to make sure that you have the actual app defined. In this case, it was directive app. So I referenced directive app up here using the ng app. So that will give me what I need. This will give me the basic controller. So let's go ahead and see what else we can do to be able to create the rest of the example. All right, so in this case then in the body, I'm going to start with a div. And that div has an ID. Like we've done before, let's make this one a book panel. The class is a panel. That's the panel class from Bootstrap that you see up here. And need to make sure that I have my ng controller equal to the controller that I defined up here, being the basic controller. Now I can use that within my div, and this is the closing of the div here. So now I have my basic controller, I can reference that. In the header information, you've seen this before as well. I'm going to have the H3 with the class panel header. Again, the panel header comes from Bootstrap. We save, make sure that everything is in order by, well, first of all, let's get a copy of that file path and reload it here. I have my books list, and you see this here, it's already styled, so I know that's, see, the Bootstrap is working correctly. Now, underneath the H3, I need to define my table. So I declare my table, give it the class of table again from Bootstrap as well. Close it. The table has a header, but in this case, the header is a bit different. It only says result. So there's only one column named result. I don't have a column for the name and a column for the page count and a column for the read. It's just one column named result. Okay, that's in the header. Now let's go ahead in the body. Inside the body, I'm going to define some table rows. Okay, and by the way, if you're loading this in Google Chrome, you can always go here and Tools, Developer Tools, right? Let me make sure that this shows up correctly for you. You can always look at the source code by looking at Tools and then Developer Tools. Right? You can load the Developer Tools and you'll be able to see the source down here if you're interested. Okay? To see what's basically going on behind the scene when AngularJS is doing its work. And I will show you this when we work with other lessons. But for now then, I have the body. Inside the body, I'm going to define a TR. That TR uses the class highlight. I'm going to create this class momentarily. Right now it does not exist. This is CSS class. And here I'm going to use ngRepeat and then dash start. This is the ngRepeat start that I was talking about. And this will be working with book in books like we've seen before. Okay, so we close this one and we close the /tr here. Now inside this I'm going to put a table data, so td, and for this one I'm going to use the book.name. So for that td then I have the book.name, and with the tr is the class highlight, but this one has ngRepeat start, not ngRepeat by itself, ngRepeat start. And on the top up here I'm going to go to the header and add my class named highlight, which is the background color is yellow, a simple CSS class. So now I have my tr that represent ngRepeat start, and then I'm going to create another tr underneath it. Inside that tr I'm going to put a td, and I'm going to say here inside that td that I have that many books, so there are, or pages in the book. So there are, I'm going to say here book dot page count in this book, so I can display the number of pages. As you can see here that we have a tr for the ngRepeat, another tr that contains data, and then right underneath it I'm going to define another tr. So it looks like, and you will see that in the result, I'm displaying multiple rows for only one ngRepeat that I started here, right? So that's the key part of my conversation in this case, that you can use the ngRepeat start. You can put bunch of data, bunch of rows if you want, and then have the ngRepeat end here, right? So in this case, when I define this my third tr, I'm going to use in here ngRepeat and then dash end. Now inside this, where I put my other TD, make sure that's fixed, and this one in here, I'm going to say that with some information, I'm going to say whether I'm done with this book or not. So I'm going to say right now, I am done with this book. Now I'm going to use the feature of read it or not to decide on that, right? So I can go here and I can say after I can put my binding and I say book.read. If it is read, then don't say anything. If it's not read, then say not. So that way I can say I am done with this book when it's read. I'm not done with this book when it's not read. Okay? But again, the key point in here is that I have ng repeat start here, that for the book in books. I have ng repeat end here, and then I have the whether I'm done or not done with the book. This is the third row right here. Make sure I save, and then I reload my page, and in here it says JavaScript made easy. That's the first one, and then it says there are 300 books and 300 pages. I missed the pages in this book. Need to fix that, but there's the third row that's not showing up. Let's go back and see what's going on with that. Let's start by fixing there are pages in this book, and in here it looks like that I missed the TD. Let's go ahead and save that and reload. Now I have, you see the 3 rows, the cell of data in here, that's for one row. That's the book, that's the pages, that's whether I'm done or not done with the book. This is the second one, highlighted correctly. This is the second one over here until Angular in details, and then third one, fourth one, fifth one, and so on. So you see how we can work with them using the ng repeat start and ng repeat end. Now for the other piece, I'd like to work with how I can use how I can reference a certain piece in the code, right? So let's go ahead and do this. Let me open an older example and then see how I can load that on the page so we don't have to type it from scratch. So here's the actual I copied the same content I was working with into directives 5 example. So here's the content, same content that we worked with before. Contains the script, contains the body, contains the ng repeat start, ng repeat end, and if I load it, here it is, it contains the actual data. As I mentioned to you before, 3 rows for every row coming in from the array, right? Okay, now let's go back here and talk about reusability, right? I need to make sure that some pieces of HTML that I can reuse them in other places, or actually some piece of HTML that I can factor them out into other files to make my main files look smaller and simpler and easier to understand. That's what I'm trying to do in this case. So let me take, for example, this table, right? And then I'm going to copy this table over to another file. Take this, cut it, go here, paste it. Now I have a file named table.html. I'm going to save this file, right? So it's saved. And then I'm going to go back to directives 5.html. Now if I load this page, this is the older one, maybe it's cached, but let's go ahead and make sure that that's not the case. Make sure that I saved, right? And if you notice that, let's say I hit the space, you notice that there's a circle up here that says whether you saved or not. Make sure you have saved. Okay, the circle is gone. And here it is, it's not there anymore, right? So that right now my books list shows nothing. So right now I don't have the table, but I have it here, right? So I can go over to the directives 5 and use my ng include to reference that file. So I can say ng-include, and then in this case I'm going to use the source attribute to tell it what to include, and make sure you use in here single quotation as well for the table, because you need to reference the actual string name, which is table.html, right? That's the name of the table here, table.html. And then after we reference that, we close it, but it's not an empty tag, so you have to always make sure that you close your ng-include completely like that. So now I have ng-include with source table.html, so because I moved the content of that over here. Angular would be able to load that HTML, but not only that, it knows to interpret its own ng repeat start and so on. So it's not only static content, it's actually some directives in there. So it knows that when it loads that content, it needs to interpret it like it does interpret any other code for Angular before it displays that for you. So let's make sure that we have everything saved. And if I go back to here to the page and reload it, I should be able to see the content being displaying. And for some reason it's not. Let's go back to the code and see what we're missing. So ng-include, that's the correct content in here, right? And then source equal table.html, and then ng-include, that's the closing tag. Well, I believe I know where the issue is in this case. And by the way, just for your own information, instead of this ng-include, I could have done the following, because ng-include can be used as an attribute. So I can say div and then ng-include instead of source. Now ng-include became equal, and then I can use my div here. Okay, so I can use ng-include this way or that way, but this is still not the issue. The case is when you serve a file, you have to serve it from a server in order for this to work properly. In this case, we're not, right? So if you look back in here, we have under file, and then we're referencing the page. That will not work. But notice if I do the same thing and I load the page through the server localhost, notice how the content will display correctly. And I'll need to go over over Node and how we can serve the pages and so on, and later on how we can work with the JSON data and how we can load that from the server. That's a bigger discussion than what we're talking about in this case. So just take it the way you see it right now, that ng-include will actually include the file for you, so you can load that, divide the actual file into different pieces and include them into your page as you see needed. But we'll go over this one in more detail as we advance more in the course. So let's move on to more directives, and thank you very much for listening. I'm Ayad Boudiab, and you take care.